Hi, everybody. My name is Greg Katz, and welcome to Tuesday's edition of WeAreSC.com's Inside the Trojans Huddle, where we tell it like it is. Friends, Inside the Trojans Huddle is a game-like panel discussion that is posted Tuesdays in the off-season and twice during the regular season. The huddle features WeAreSC columnists, staff writers, and historians. We first start off with the pregame show where we introduce our panel members for this edition of Inside the Trojans Huddle, and then give you the latest USC Trojans football news. Now let's meet Tuesday's panelists. A WeAreSC columnist who writes WeAreSC.com's The Monday Morass, Yay or Nay, and Sunday Takeaways, in addition to regular season football and basketball reports. He also hosts his own podcast show entitled Locked On USC. Marc Kulkin, the editor-in-chief of WeAreSC.com, columnist, national recruiting guru, and a graduate of USC, Erik McKinney, and a former William Jewell College defensive back and WeAreSC columnist who writes the popular WeAreSC.com column Musings with Arledge and his own weekly WeAreSC.com video show, Musings with Arledge Solo Edition, and is a graduate of the USC Law School, Chris Arledge, and a weekly WeAreSC columnist who writes Fridays the Obvious, Not So Obvious, IMHO Sunday, and is active member of the Football Writers Association of America. Your moderator and producer of Inside the Trojans Huddle, Greg Katz. Before we kick off this Tuesday's edition of Inside the Trojans Huddle, here's an update in USC football news. The Trojans kicked off spring practice on Sunday, which was closed to the media. On Howard Jones, Brian Kennedy Fields, the Trojans will practice 3 times a week, with the exception of next week's academic spring vacation. After spring vacation, practice will resume on Tuesday, March 21st. Spring ball will conclude on Saturday, April 15th with the annual spring game in the Coliseum, which will be open to the public. Kickoff time for the spring game is 12 noon. After 2 days of totally closed practices on Sunday and Tuesday, the media will finally get its first look at the 2023 Spring Trojans. On Wednesday, media will be allowed to watch stretching, some early period drills, which at that point, the bulk of the practice sessions will become a totally closed session. During Tuesday morning's Zoom press conference, Lincoln Riley informed the media that he expects to have an extremely very high-level defense at USC, and he expects it soon. He's been impressed with a number of newcomers. Team is a little low on numbers at wide receiver and the offensive line. There are less position battles this spring. Freshman quarterback Malachi Nelson is throwing and participating in a measured way and will take some reps. And the talent difference compared to last season is at a different level. Riley also expected training camp to begin around July 25th to 27th. The Trojans also announced that Pro Day, a day devoted to NFL draft eligible players working out before pro scouts, will take place on Tuesday, March 21st. Pro Day is closed to the general public. And in unfortunate NFL combine news, former Trojans offensive lineman Andrew Voorhees reportedly suffered an ACL injury to his right leg when he fell during a non-contract lateral movement drill. Voorhees, however, later still bench pressed 225 pounds 38 times. Andrew was projected to be a 4th-round selection. Friends, WeAreSC's Inside the Trojan Huddle greatly appreciate your viewer and listenership. We encourage those of you watching on sites like YouTube to click the red subscriber and like buttons. It's greatly appreciated, and it's free. And a reminder, you can also listen to Inside the Trojans Huddle on many available podcast sites. And one reminder, an update, WeAreSC.com is offering a spring ball subscription special. You can get all the WeAreSC premium content for just $29.99 up to August 31st, 2023, and 4 months for just $10. All right, we kick off the first half with this. Panel on Tuesday morning, Lincoln Riley spoke to the media through a Zoom call. So I'm going to ask you what stood out regarding Lincoln Riley's comments on Tuesday morning. We lead off with Marc Kulkin. What were your takeaways on Tuesday morning's exchange with the coach? Hello there.
Mark, you're muted. I'm sure what you're saying is amazing, but we can't hear any of it.
Okay. So
you know what? Go back. I'll speak for you. Just mute it and I'll talk.
I've had a really rough technical morning that Erik can attest to. So nothing really stood out. A lot of coach speak. maybe that the fact that he said that Gentry wasn't going to participate in spring practice, regardless of him having the surgery this late. I don't know, I kind of raised my eyebrow a little bit. He mentioned Mason Cobb already taking on a leadership role similar to how Shane Lee did last year when he arrived. I like the fact that, none of the players have any more that deer in the headlights look when he asks them to do something, and that he's going to be pushing them even harder. So again, nothing really stood out other than the fact that, Greg, you mentioned it, that he expects the defense to be good and to be good right away. So if we're going to use the same scheme and the same defensive coordinator, and we're moving guys around a little bit, different positions, we're going to talk about here momentarily, I'm sure. We'll see. He's got 15 practices to make those words come to fruition.
All right, Chris Arledge, what was your takeaway after listening to Coach?
So he talked about how there's just a world of difference between this spring and last spring in terms of guys understanding what they're supposed to be doing, a lot less deer in the headlights look. You have an increase in expectations. He's telling the team and the coaches that what was acceptable last year is no longer acceptable. And I think there's probably a lot of truth to that. If you look historically, successful college football coaches, when they go to a top program that's been struggling, there's usually a huge jump between year one and year two, right? There was with Carroll at USC. I mean, his year two really started the ball rolling. But that was true at Nick Saban in Alabama. It was true at Urban Meyer when he went to Florida. It was true at Bob Stoops when he went to OU. There's usually a huge jump from year one to year two, even putting aside roster building, because in the old days, you couldn't very effectively just pull 15 starters out of the portal, right? But and so when he talks about how that he expects a huge jump based on people understanding what they're doing and raising the expectations, I think that's probably true. Even if it wasn't a far more talented team than last year, which he suggests it is, you would expect this year's team would be much better because of that second year jump. So I thought that was expected, but the fact that he focused on that, I thought was interesting.
WeAreSC editor-in-chief, Erik McKinney, what was your takeaways?
I'm going to say all the stuff Chris did. That's what jumped out to me. And it's more sort of how comfortable he is with that. He talked a lot last season about when he kind of took over at USC. It's that first week kind of in December. That clock is ticking to get to spring ball. And it's not just how do you coach the players when you come in, it's how do you rebuild a program from the ground up. He had to do a ton of non-football stuff, I think, from that point going to spring ball. He said that today this was a full off season. Last season was not. They did not get a full off season from kind of coaching the coaches how to coaching the players how to take coaching, all of that kind of stuff. You don't need that. He talked about having the nutritionist there for a full off season now, and them understanding strength and conditioning and all of that goes into building an off season. That's what stood out, just how confident he was that, yeah, this looked like a real off season. We were able to make those progressions. And, he talked about kind of gains being weight and strength and all that with a ton of players that needed it this off season. And again, he sounded like a coach talking to the media for the first time during spring ball. Hey, there's some stuff we got to work on. We're going to be great here. We got some positivity here, all of that stuff. There was nothing that stood out where he said, man, we don't have a wide receiver. We don't have this, there wasn't anything that was kind of jaw-dropping, eye-opening from it. But there was, I did kind of feel that confidence of, okay, we really got a full off season and this looks different 2 practices in than what we had last spring. And again, the depth you mentioned at the top, a couple positions, offensive line, wide receiver, where he doesn't love just the overall numbers of how many guys are there, expects to add people at those spots. But I think two of the key spots, defensive line, linebacker, he specifically mentioned really like the depth there, really like the competition and the battles and all that kind of stuff. That's obviously going to jump out those two spots, I think, for a lot of USC fans.
Well, I wasn't surprised that he said the defenses, he's really expecting big things from the defense. And the old saying, you said it, we'll watch it. I thought it was interesting that Malachi Nelson is actually throwing, is going to be focused on and will participate in some reps, obviously being very monitored. The fact that he's out there throwing, I think is really a nice sign. I also thought his comment about Rayleigh Brown having still had a decent freshman season. He was pleased with it, but he has other areas that he has to work on, such as when he doesn't have the ball. So I took that as pass blocking. And I thought it was kind of curious because he did say that he had been contacted by other entities, programs, about his assistant coaches. And I thought that was rather interesting. He said nobody's going anywhere, but he was, I don't know if the term flattered is appropriate, but he says, look, we've got a great staff and they know what we're building and they're a part of it. And it's always a good sign when other people want to get your staff. So I took that as an interesting takeaway from my end of it. So let's move on here, guys. Panel, there's been some notable spring ball position changes. Junior Corey Foreman has been moved from edge rusher to defensive down lineman. Devin Tompkins has been moved from rush end to defensive down lineman. Redshirt freshman linebacker Carson Tabaracci has been moved from inside linebacker to tight end. What do you make of all these position changes, Marc Kulkin?
Well, I find it interesting that Tompkins he's basically now the same size as Thule at the NFL Combine, as long as USC's weights and measurements are accurate, because Thule apparently lost 24 pounds between the Cotton Bowl and when he was weighed in Indianapolis. So I like that size there. They're looking for somebody to replace Thule. As far as Foreman goes, I think everyone's going to agree that experiment at the stand-up rush end is probably over. And if Coach Nua can perform whatever magic he has with Corey this year, that he was able to do with Tellini in a year and help Thule go from 5.5 sacks to leading the nation with 13.5. Maybe that's the direction they're trying to go, because that's probably Corey's most natural position. I mean, that's what he played in high school. Put him back there, see what he can do. Although it is interesting that he lost weight and now they're making him more of a down lineman. So I'm interested to see how that plays out. And then as far as Carson Tabaracci moving to tight end, I think that was that happened because Ethan Ray didn't appear on the spring roster, and all of a sudden that room needed another player. And he came to Utah as a running back, so obviously his athleticism says that he can play on both sides of the ball, and we'll see if he gets utilized.
Chris, what about these moves? What caught your eye?
Well, I mean, the Foreman move obviously caught my eye because the other two guys weren't expected necessarily to contribute a lot this year. I hate talking about Corey Foreman on these things, and so I'm gonna
Oh, come on, Chris. Come on.
I hate it.
Come on.
Look. Corey Foreman was not going to be productive at that stand-up rushing position. We know that by now. And there are a lot of reasons why that may be the case, but one of the obvious ones is he never showed the athleticism to play there. Not once did his athleticism jump out and you say, man, he really got upfield in a hurry, right? He really turned the corner. He didn't have that in him. So, they have him slim down and stand up in a spot he can't play for 2 years. I say it was two different coaching staffs, but and now you're hoping he can play with his hand in the dirt. Maybe he can gain back 20 pounds between now and September, but it's not likely that he's going to be able to play there either. So I think at this point, the fact that they're moving him into the D line where he's going to be very undersized just means that all the excitement of 2 years ago when they signed the #1 defensive recruit in the nation, We can now say they're not going to get anything out of that. They got 1 sack out of it.
Eric, what-
And a game-saving interception.
And a fantastic catch.
They'll always have
maybe
that.
he should be the big wideout. Devin Tompkins, I don't know. He's a big guy with a lot of athleticism. We never really have gotten to see him play because we don't get to watch practices, and he doesn't play on Saturdays yet. But the coaches seem excited, so that'll be interesting. Tabarachi move is a little bit odd because he doesn't have ideal size for a tight end. I think he's probably going to play. He's going to be more of an H back, probably playing more like a fullback than anything else, and that may be a good spot for him. I can't imagine that Tabarachi this year as a tight end is going to be the difference between USC scoring 45 a game and 46 a game, but we'll see what comes of it.
There's a big difference between 45 and 46 points.
Sometimes there is.
Your point is
USC
well taken.
USC scores over 40 points and loses by a point sometimes. So, there might be.
I think that was pointed out in your great interview with Mark Carrier. He says, how can we score over 40 points and lose 3 games? By the way, just for information's sake, who is your next person on Chris Arledge solo edition video? Have you decided on who it's going to be yet?
I haven't decided. I'm not going to have a guest on this week's show. I'm just going to be talking. So I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but we'll see. I like the old interviews, and I don't yet have a feel for whether the audience does. But I thought Carrier was great, and he's one of my all-time favorite Trojans. So it was fun to have him on.
Well, if you haven't watched or listened to Chris's show, it really is a great interview with who he has. So I highly encourage it. Erik McKinney, what do you think about these changes? Good, bad? Who cares? What do you think?
Yeah, the Devin Tompkins one is not a change. We never saw him go at rush end the entire year last year when they went through position drills. He was on the defensive line from the beginning. He was always going to grow and put on weight and be a defensive lineman at USC. I'm excited about him. I really am. I know they brought in some veteran and older defensive linemen, and there's guys seemingly kind of in his way. I really like the young. He's age young for his class. He played a ton of basketball. He has a bunch of athleticism, and that the body is kind of growing in a good way. I think he could be, and maybe it's not this year, but I think he's potentially a guy to watch. And then, the Corey Foreman thing, I think if you have health with those top 3 guys, and that's Romello Height and Jamil Mohammed coming over, and then Solomon Byrd coming back too, I think you're okay at that spot. And it's also, again, he's listed as a defensive end. When we go watch them do position drills on Wednesday, could he be running with the rush ends? Sure. I mean, throughout the year, could he move back and forth? Absolutely. Not to say that defensive end is an easier spot, but when it comes with the idea of put your hand down, run at this guy, try to get past him, I like that move for Corey to be able to just kind of, hey, do this. We saw, Solomon Tuliupupu has dealt with so many injuries and all that, and it was just like, hey, if you can come down here, play this spot, move forward, try to push somebody around, do this. He made a real contribution last year, and so there's the hope that Corey does that. I think when he's not kind of on an island and standing out there and obvious where it's like, hey, this guy's got to make a play here, and it just wasn't happening, that could be sort of a boost for him to move into a different position group. For Carson Tabarachi, what the worst thing that can happen to you, I think, as a young player is to be injured and to have your position move around a bunch early on. So it seems like a really bad thing that he spent his entire freshman year hurt and not playing, and now all of a sudden his position is changed. But if he can play that H-back spot, that's a spot that Lincoln Riley needs a guy and has utilized, and he's utilized guys with that more fullback frame in the past at Oklahoma. And so if you can be that guy, all the tight ends on the roster are kind of the big long tight ends. He's used kind of a more bowling back type of guy in that spot that can carry the ball, catch out of the backfield, and block. maybe there's a spot for that. I know if Jude Wolf comes back fully healthy, there's a lot of anticipation for what he can do. But no, in terms of the red flags when you're young, being hurt and having your position changed, I don't know if I necessarily see that for this one. I think this is a move that does make a little sense. Again, I don't think he's starting every single game and 10, 12 touches a game or anything like that, but definitely something to keep an eye on as it moves forward, because again, he's not learning the offensive side of the ball. This is a guy with a ton of history playing offense all throughout high school.
Well, I always find that spring ball, the intrigue to me is who gets changed positions. Under John McKay, he did that all the time. You saw tight ends move to offensive tackles, and going back to Devin Thompson, some of SC's greatest linemen were all basketball players like Devin Thompson. So that's unique. I was curious that my first thought is when Foreman got moved, I thought about Alex Grinch and when he was up at Washington State, and it was Samson. Was it Samson? The name, there was a very
Hercules.
Hercules.
Yeah.
I knew it was biblical.
Hercules.
I knew that I could count on someone whose father is a minister that would get that right for me. Thank you very much. Hercules. What was his last name? Do you remember his last name?
Mataafa.
There we go. My Samoan encyclopedia. There we go. See, you learn something on this show every day. No, I thought of him and I said, now, could he survive in today's era at 235 pounds and rely on a great quickness? So that is something that I'm going to keep an eye on. So maybe the idea of when I close my eyes and I think of offensive linemen of today at 300 and 325 pounds going against a 235 pound down lineman, maybe you can be that quick and not get brutalized. I think that the Devin Tompkins thing is kind of interesting to me because he's so athletic that he's liable to surprise people and certainly maybe can get in the mix. And Tabarachi, I think, is really interesting to me because I think of some of the combination fullbacks, H-back type that Pete Carroll kind of used at some occasion. He might be a designated type of player that I could see near the goal line, comes out of the backfield and catches, because he does have a history in high school of playing in the backfield. I think he was a fullback. So I think those three moves are going to be interesting in the long run. We'll see. Maybe in the spring game we'll probably won't get an idea about it because then maybe Riley won't show too much. Guys, let me ask you this question. Let's move on here. With spring practice having just begun on Sunday, give me three offensive players that need to show the most improvement over the next 15 days of spring practice in order for the Trojans to be successful in 2023. Give me the names and give me your explanations. Start with Mark. Who's your three?
So it's funny because I put this list together before Lincoln Riley spoke this morning, and then Lincoln Riley kind of pulled the rug out from under me a little bit when he mentioned Cortland Ford's name. He said he's had a great offseason. He's dropped some weight, he's looking great, and they expect a lot out of him. And I agree. Last year he started, I think Eric pointed this out in one of his articles, he started at left tackle, he finished the season at left tackle. But in between that time, he lost that starting job, whether it was due to injury, weight, whatever. There was something going on there. And Mason Murphy, who's one of my three guys, took over starting for him at left tackle. Well, Mason Murphy also started at right tackle, and then at the end of the year, he was backing up people. So these guys, I think, really need to solidify their roles that they are going to be the starting tackles this year, because the writing was on the wall last year when you bring in a Bobby Haskins. They wrote it in big, bold letters this year with exclamation points when you bring in three guys. That's telling me that the staff doesn't have a lot of confidence in the younger guys who played last year and showed what they can do in game situations. So those two guys really need to step up and say, hey, you know what? These are our spots. We earned it last year. We're gonna earn it again this year. And then my third guy on offense, and with Mason, he just needs to get more consistent. There's a reason they like him so much. I mean, he's got that size. But my third guy, I think one of you mentioned it, is going to be Rayleigh Brown. And he's not going to be getting a lot of touches at running back, especially with Austin Jones coming back, and they brought in Marshawn Lloyd. So how's he going to do playing in that slot position? You know, they want to get him the ball, you know, in open space. How's he going to handle that move? And is he going to be able to deal with the competition with, you know, a Zachariah Branch, a Mario Williams, a Taj Washington? Because now all of a sudden he's not the guy. So those are the three guys I chose on offense to. They're really going to have to step it up in these 15 practices during spring.
Who has to step it up, Chris Arledge?
No, on offense, nobody does. I mean, there's some guys. I'm going to talk about some guys that I hope will step it up. But if what you're saying is who needs to really step it up for the offense to be successful, I guess my question for you is: Caleb Williams still going to be there and healthy? Because if he is, with the talent he has around, unless you lose 5 offensive linemen to injury, or unless Caleb Williams gets lost and doesn't make it to the Coliseum, USC's offense is going to be lights out. It's going to be the best offense in the country. It just is. So nobody. But here are the guys I would like to see step up. I would like Brendan Rice to step up. We saw a fantastic Cotton Bowl from him. But for most of the year, people were wondering, why is he getting so much time? He was inconsistent with his hands. He was inconsistent with his play. USC could use a big physical guy. They have a bunch of small, fast guys. And Brendan Rice clearly has a talent to be that guy. He needs to be consistent. So I'd like him to step up. Rayleigh Brown is also on my list. I actually think Rayleigh can get quite a bit of time in the backfield if he can become consistent and reliable. He needs to be able to pass block. He needs to, when it's 3rd and 4 and he can get 4, he needs to get it instead of trying to get 30. There's some things he needs to do. But you're talking, if USC wants a game breaker in the backfield, it's going to be Rayleigh Brown, and I think Riley does. Somebody you can move around, motion out of the backfield, try to get a linebacker lined up on him in the slot. Once you do, I mean, there are things you can do with him. The way Norm Chow used to do with Reggie Bush a lot of times, if he can improve his consistency. My third one is going to be an offensive lineman. Actually, Mason Murphy and Cortland Ford are both good ones. I'm going to go with Jonah Monheim. I think all 3 of those guys have shown they can play, and it's now time for one or more of them to actually take that next step and become a dominant football player. And I think they're all capable of it. But we haven't seen it from any of them yet. So I'm gonna go with Monheim, although Ford and Murphy both fit the bill. Those guys are now in a position where they can go from being a guy who plays a lot on a pretty good offensive line on a team that scores a lot of points to being a dominant guy who's now talked about as somebody who's going to be a first-day draft choice. And the question is whether any of the 3 can make that step.
All right, Eric, who's your threesome?
Yeah, I'm going to go with 2 offensive linemen too. And I think the key on this and why is how important Caleb Williams is, right? Like he had to do a ton of scrambling and he took a bunch of hits. He's going to take hits as a runner because he's going to try to pick up extra yards. I think he's going to be better probably this year about getting down, getting out of bounds. And he did do that last year. But having a solid wall up there on that offensive line against defenses that you know are going to bring everything they can. Whatever that defensive coordinator knows is coming at Caleb Williams, you'd assume, this fall. So I'm going to say Justin Dedich in the middle, and that doesn't have a lot to do with he played poorly last year and needs to get a ton better, but it's going to be a position switch, and he's moving to center, and I know he's done it before. Having that kind of veteran guy in Brett Nealon where the calls were there and all of that, I think that gave Caleb Williams kind of that security blanket. Justin D, he just needs to show that he could do that. And I think he will. But again, it's a big spring when you have a new center. Again, when your quarterback is that important, just to figure out getting them on the same page, getting Justin D to the point where he's reading defenses and lockstep with Josh Henson and Lincoln Riley and everything that goes into that. Again, the expectation for him he'll get it and be great, and it'll go. As good as he can possibly be, I think is pretty key to the USC offensive line. And then staying there, Michael Tarquin coming over from Florida. He posted pretty good grades, all of that kind of stuff from the people who do that. When he got hurt early on in the year, it was a real young guy, a freshman, that sort of announced his presence in that line. And then they kind of bounced back and forth the rest of the season. So it wasn't a full season for him. Again, a new offense coming over, new expectations, all of that kind of stuff. For him to be able to potentially step in at right tackle and completely lock that spot down. Again, Caleb Williams moves so much that left tackle, right tackle doesn't always seem like it holds true. He got as much pressure off the right side as from the left side last year, again, seemingly. But any offensive lineman who can raise their game to the point where they leave spring going, yeah, that's the guy, we're super comfortable with that guy there, that's going to be a huge benefit to the offense as a whole, to Caleb Williams, to Lincoln Riley, to all of that stuff. And then Brendan Rice was my other guy. There is such a difference for all offenses across the country. The difference between, yeah, we have a bunch of good wide receivers, or yeah, we have an elite top 15 NFL draft pick wide receiver. Brendan Rice showed flashes with that size, the speed, and the hands occasionally that he could be that guy. USC needs that guy. And you can throw Dorian Singer in there. It's a lot to ask that of Zachariah Branch, but I think he's a guy that potentially could give you that. But the size, I think, that Brendan Rice brings can tilt the field a little bit. And if he's that guy where Caleb can, yeah, I think he's down there somewhere, let's go give him a chance, and he can make those plays for you, it takes your offense to a different level. Again, Lincoln Riley could find 11 people on the way to the stadium and put together a pretty good offensive game plan, I think. But when you need it, and if you need to score 52 or 65 or 110 or whatever it is, having that absolute number one dominant wide receiver is big. And we've seen every spring, it feels like before we saw Michael Pittman have that breakout year and Amon-Ra and Drake London, just for three recent ones, you saw it in spring. You saw, okay, that's a different guy this year getting ready for the fall. And so I think that's why, for me, it's with Rice, because he did show those flashes, but it wasn't as consistent as you'd want it from that number one guy.
Well, I think that all your answers are pretty much right on. You could pick any of them. My three is Cortland Ford. One, because I think that he has the ability to start, but he has the ability to maybe play a guard position, and they need to make sure that they can rotate players. So he needs to make sure his consistency level. Brendan Rice, same thing. I don't know which Brendan Rice I'm going to see, the one that really made your eyes pop out of your head because he looked so good, or the one that drops passes and you go, how did he drop that one? So I think if he plays at an elite form and consistent, that's really going to help Caleb Williams, I can tell you that. And Justin Dedich, I thought also, even though he's going to start for all the reasons that Erik mentioned, the switching positions, leadership role, the whole thing, a lot's going to fall on his shoulders, calling out the line play. So it'll be interesting. Let's switch now to the defensive side of the ball. Give me three players that need to show the most improvement over the spring in order for the Trojans to be successful in 2023. And again, give me your explanation for each player. So, Mark, who's your three guys you want on defense that need to show the most improvement?
I'll just start at the linebacker level. I'm going to go with Rajon Davis. We already know that Shane Lee, Gentry, Mason Cobb, they're going to play because Lincoln and Grinch brought them in to play immediately. You've got Garrison Madden, who Erik pointed out recently. He took a redshirt year. He's much bigger. He's got a lot of speed. You've got Tackett Curtis, who everybody is just waiting to see how soon can he get on the field and be an impact player. So Rajon is a true junior. He hasn't used a redshirt year yet, and he's been in that 50-50 club that Lincoln Riley likes to talk about. So he had a strong Cotton Bowl. Lincoln Riley and the staff recognized it. Now it's up to Rajon to, take that next step up and claim, a lot of playing time at that linebacker level. Otherwise, I don't know what's going to happen. Damani Jackson, not because he has to prove his, how good of a player he can be. He just needs to stay on the field. Can he stay healthy? And you've got 15 spring camp practices to get that taken care of. And then the other guy, I'm going to stay at cornerback, is Sierra Wright. Last year he started, and then by the end of the year, he was literally backing up everybody at cornerback. He had lost a starting role, and I'm not sure he had a role other than unless, somebody wasn't getting it done in front of him. So it'll be interesting to see if he's ready to take that next step. I know at one point, Dante Williams questioned his commitment to football, and then all of a sudden he's starting. That's a deep room. So if Sierra can come back and claim a starting role, can Damani maybe move inside to nickel? I think that's another position that he can play if we're talking about cross-training and showing your versatility. I think it'll be interesting to see what happens with those three guys. There's a lot of guys on defense we can talk about. But right now I'm just going to go with those three.
All right, Chris, who do you want to talk about your threesome?
I'm going to start with Tackett Curtis because I think he's going to have to play this year. He's not, unless there are injuries, he's not going to start, but I think he's going to have to play. And it's a huge jump from high school to college. And so he's going to need to use this spring to help the game slow down a little bit and to learn a new position. But I think he's going to have to play, so he's going to have to do that wisely. Tyrone Taleni, look, I don't think you can be an elite program unless you go too deep on the defensive line. And if they're going to do that, if they're going to go too deep with good players, Taleni's going to have to be a guy who plays really well. He played surprisingly well last year. He needs to make another big jump. And this is a good time to do that. Romello Height, I think he's going to be the starter. Look, somebody has to take that position and do something with it. And it can't be a defensive tackle they put out there because they're so disappointed with the guys they have. That's what happened last year. He has athletic ability. If he stays healthy, I think he might be able to be a really solid player. If not him, then it has to be Jamil Muhammad. Or I noticed that Sam Green is not listed as a defensive lineman. He's listed as an edge guy, which means that he's not actually that undersized. He's got some fast twitch. He appears to be a guy with a big motor. I don't know how he is with his pass rush moves or how he is using his hands. I don't know. But being that he's an edge guy, not a defensive lineman, I don't think he has to get all that much bigger to play there. He's a guy who may, if Height and Muhammad don't really turn it on, he may be a guy who surprises this year. But I'm going to go with Height as my third guy.
Erik?
Yeah, so the answer is all the rush ends and all the safeties and all the linebackers and all the defensive linemen. I like the idea of bringing the floor up and making sure that you're too deep, like you don't drop off the way when USC lost linebackers last year, they had to go to an entirely new defense because they couldn't throw somebody else out there and keep doing the same scheme. But I'm going to go to the top. It's kind of like what I talked about with Brendan Rice at that wide receiver spot. I think you have to be good, but you need elite guys. So I'm going to go right down the middle, right up front, and Mason Cobb, Keon Bars, and Anthony Lucas are my three. I think those guys need to finish the year as first or second team all conference guys. And I think there's the talent there. There's been flashes. Lucas doesn't have a ton of playing history, but he walked into Texas A&M as part of maybe the best defensive line class of all time, as certainly in like modern recruiting history. And he played as a true freshman. Keon Bars had a great 2021 season. The 2022 season was not exactly that. And then Mason Cobb was part of it. It wasn't a very good Oklahoma State defense, which it's hard to shine when you're giving up huge numbers in terms of the rush and points. And and all that. He had a ton of tackles. There were some missed tackles and missed opportunities in there too. So I think those three guys, if they can come out of spring playing at that level that USC needs them to play at and being kind of a dominant trio, if you're building a defense, those are probably the three spots where I'm going to put most of my effort and energy and money and all that into shoring up these three spots. So that's it for me, is getting those elite guys on this defense. And there's some playing time, certainly in Bars and Cobb, and flashes the recruiting prestige of an Anthony Lucas. So that's it for me. But really, pull up the defensive depth chart and point to a guy. And I think we talked about, this is a full off season. They understand the scheme better going into year two. That's the entire program, as well as the actual just defensive scheme. So I think there's hope and some positivity about that for the group. But yeah, it's time to get it done.
Yeah, I'm actually go with the starter, Shane Lee. I think he needs to get better. I think he needs to get, I don't question his leadership ability and some of the other things, but there was some deficiencies and consistency with his play that if they're going to really be good at the second level, he needs to improve his game to the point where it's equal to his leadership. Hopefully in the spring he can accomplish that. Romello Height, man, I tell you, for a position that's considered really a necessity to be successful, SC's got a lot of challenges at the rush end. I don't know if Romello Height is that good, but he needs to be that good if he's going to start and be a difference maker out there. And Damani Jackson, it's all about his health. He's gotten so much notoriety and has played so little that I think in order for them to be successful, they have to have some good cornerback play. And I think that he has to rise to the occasion. And again, it's his health, which is going to decide, I think, how far he goes as far as realizing his potential. All right, guys, what part of the offense do you think will be the most improved after 15 days of spring ball, and why, Mark?
I don't know. Chris doesn't think it needs to get any better. So
that's true. That's a good.
Good. They shouldn't even practice. I don't want to risk injuries. Just have them watch.
I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm just trying to figure out where they need to get better. So because you guys kept bringing up Brendan Rice's name, I'll say wide receiver. They're replacing Jordan Addison. They lost who I think everyone anticipated would be their big wide receiver this year, and Kyle Ford. Their numbers are a little bit down, according to Lincoln Riley. So maybe the wide receivers need to improve by the end of spring camp. I don't know.
Well, I hesitate to go to Chris because he says they're perfect already. But Chris, is there any place you think they need to improve?
Well, they're not perfect, and I don't think they are. But what do I think will be most improved? I think the running game will be most improved because they're going to have new offensive line starters. They're having guys who have started in the past and are moving around. It takes time for an offensive line to develop. They have to work together. I think the offensive line is going to be really good this year, but it takes a while. And so I suspect that's what we'll see improve the most over the course of spring. Not that we'll see any of the improvement, but I think it'll take place. So I think that's what's going to happen. But no, I don't expect that. I don't expect there are going to be any huge surprises. I think Caleb Williams is going to be really good this year. And I think a lot of his skill guys are pretty fast and will get put in space by one of the best offensive tactical guys in college football. So they're not going to be a lot of surprises.
Erik, where's the improvement going to come, and will you be surprised?
Chris said running game. I'll say passing game. I think it's reps. You got a new guy coming over in Dorian Singer. Jordan Addison is gone from the fall, and so there's going to be guys that get kind of more time. Zachariah Branch is there, and that's just one of those things where it's about reps. And so at the end of 15 practices, they'll have taken more reps. Caleb Williams will be in a better kind of groove with a bunch of those guys. I think it'll be better when they start fall camp after summer and all that stuff. But I can see kind of that being once they get on the field in terms of official practices and all that and get all those throws in. I could see that being something that looks a lot better in the spring game than it did whatever it looked like on Sunday. The run game to me is going to be interesting just because Lincoln did talk about we're going to move guys around a bunch and we're going to take a look at a bunch of different looks with those offensive linemen. And so if they're not kind of settling in and here's your spot, it'll be interesting to see kind of what that looks like over the 15 practices as they try to figure out, yeah, this guy looks better here or there or whatever. He said inside guys are going to play outside guys are going to play inside. So that'll be an interesting shuffle. And Ethan White's not here, which I think everyone kind of has certainly penciled him in at left guard. So you're potentially playing, you don't have, your starting five at any point this spring.
Yeah, I tell you, I think the offensive line is going to show the most improvement, but I am very disappointed that Ethan White isn't playing because we all know that offensive line plays about continuity and working in tandem with your other line mates. To have Ethan White not play in 15 spring practices, I know he's experienced, I know he's good, but you still got to get used to playing with your partner. And it would be nice to have had all of them together, but I think that's the one area that's going to show the most improvement, not only running, but pass blocking as well. All right, what about, we'll end the first half with what part of the defense will be the most improved after 15 days of spring practice and why? Mark, where do you see it?
Just because I'm hoping on a wing and a prayer, tackling. There's nothing else. I don't want to focus on anything else on the defense. The players are going to, be in their position groups. As a whole, tackling. Just be better.
Chris?
Well, that would be nice. I think what you're going to see is you're going to see a lot more guys in the front seven who can make big plays. Thule had 22 tackles for loss last year, which was 28% of the team's total. That's not good. It's not, I mean, it's good to have, it's good for him. It's not good for everybody else. You need to have a lot more guys who can defeat blockers and make plays in the backfield. I think they will. Mason Cobb had as many tackles for loss last year as all of USC's linebacking corps did. You have 3 new defensive linemen, all of whom have, well, 2 of whom have a lot of experience, and the third one has 5-star talent. And so I think again, you're going to get a jump from Taleni. I think you're going to get some athleticism from Tackett Curtis. I think you're going to have a lot more guys up front who can make plays. And USC needs that because last year, if Thule wasn't making a play, for the most part, nobody was. So I think that's what you're going to get. And I'm looking forward to that because that will help immensely if you have 8 guys, 9 guys who are getting 5, 6, 7, 8 tackles for loss. That's going to be a big deal for this team. And I think they can do that.
Erik?
Yeah, that's mine. Competent depth in the front seven, and that's at linebacker, that's at rush end, that's at defensive line. I think there's more confidence from those guys. There's more experience. I think Sean Nua specifically is a very good coach, and again with that full off season, and now the guys going in with an understanding of expectations and what practice looks like and all of that. I think there's a jump. In all of those groups, all the I guess the 3 position groups affiliated in that front seven.
All right, I originally, my first thought was the defensive line will be the most improved. They really need to have a defensive line that can quasi control the game. But I have to be honest with you, I totally agree with Kulkin on this one. I think they have to really, number one, they got to get guys on the ground. I'm not, obviously I want to see turnovers, but you've got to get these players to go on the ground. And I think it was interesting in Chris Arledge's interview with Mark Carrier, it's something that he also mentioned, that you got to tackle the guy. You got to stop the play. Even if that means going down to his ankles, stop the ball. So I think probably I would rank in order 1, 2, tackling and the front 4 or the front 7.
It's funny when Erik put out all those numbers about Mason Cobb as during the intrigue list, and he mentioned his 96 tackles, and then he talked about how many he missed. I went and looked up who was USC's leading tackler last year, and I was shocked. And I understand Gentry missed a few games, but Max Williams led the team with 79. That's your nickelback.
Is that a good sign?
That was a staggering number to me, that 79 led the team and it came at the nickelback position, which was one more than Shane Lee at 78.
And a few more, I think Gentry was around 71 or so, even missing some time.
Right.
Yeah. Here's the thing. Gentry's not going to play in the spring, which is disappointing, but Riley talked about how this gives him a chance to continue to add good weight, which is something that Riley pointed out he needs to do. And he does because he's just not thick enough. But let's not lose sight of the fact that that guy is a really productive, fantastic football player, right? I mean, in the old days, he couldn't have played that spot when you run an ISO with a 240-pound fullback at him all day. But that's not the way the game was played. And that guy gets his hand on the ball. He's all over the place. He's disruptive. I mean, I'm really looking forward to watching him play this year because I think if he's healthy, I think we'll see a better Eric Gentry than we saw last year. And he was fun to watch last year.
All right, let's move on to halftime. Kind of a change of subject here. Panel, the Pac-12 has announced it's moving its Pac-12 Media Day. It's scheduled for Friday, July 21st, but it is going from Los Angeles to Las Vegas. What is the message, and why did Commissioner George Kaliakov move it to Las Vegas on a Friday, no less? Eric, you got some insight on that?
Well, you can't have it in Los Angeles when you don't have any teams there, and I mean, I guess they don't have teams in Las Vegas either yet, but he's got a ton of history in Las Vegas, and so it makes sense. The Pac-12, even before USC and UCLA left, there was, the Pac-12, the basketball tournaments moving out there, and it makes sense as a sort of middle of the road place between Colorado, Utah, Arizona. Like, everyone can get there, and there was always complaining, why do we have to go to LA? Why do USC and UCLA get to just sit there? But ultimately, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter anymore. They can host it wherever they want.
Mark, I'm interested to hear your take on this one.
No, it's kind of what Eric was alluding to. I think George wanted to be on his own home turf, feel a little bit more comfortable. Obviously, USC, UCLA aren't going to be in LA, and Vegas is a great place to hang out, party, throw it on a Friday. Everybody will stay out there for, probably an extra day at least. And Pac-10, I don't know, maybe, George will have a big announcement and he'll use Las Vegas as the stage. They already do the Pac-12 basketball tournament. You have the conference championship game out there for football. Might as well just make Las Vegas their home base. Maybe UNLV will be part of the conference one day. Who knows?
Chris, is there a message here?
I don't know. If so, it's like most of the messages that come out of the Pac-12 administration. It's hard to decipher what it is, and it's clear that nobody else in the college football world cares. Maybe it is that UNLV is going to replace USC and is going to become the key to locking in that great media rights deal. Here's the thing. I don't know what the message is, but Las Vegas obviously can't replace LA. Historically, the conference gets, if you dropped a pin in Long Beach and then drew a semicircle from there, about an hour and a half drive outside of Long Beach, that's going to be about 80% of the difference makers in the Pac-12 conference almost every year. So, it's disappointing they're losing LA, but Las Vegas will give you Zachariah Branch, and I'm happy about that, but it's not going to replace LA. It just can't. So I don't know. I don't even care. I can't wait to get out of this conference, to be honest with you.
Well, I'm going to tell you, I think it's a big deal. I think it's a big message that Kaliakov wants to get out of the LA area. It served its purpose as being a major media center, easy place to get in and out of. Of course, you could say the same thing about going through McCarran Airport in Las Vegas, but I see this as the first real sign of transition, even though we've got another year of being in the Pac-12, but I see him saying, we're transitioning now. We're going to take away anything that has to do with LA at this point. We're not going to be a part of it. And this is the new beginning for the Pac-12. And I kind of was intrigued by Mark's comment that maybe, well, and of course, by that time, we may already know if USC and UCLA have been replaced by San Diego State and perhaps SMU. But I think this is a real message that the divorce between the Southern California footprint, or at least the LA area footprint, is well underway. And I don't necessarily think personally that it's all about George and his living in Las Vegas, so to speak, an affinity for it. You know, you could rationalize that, well, they hold all their championship games in Las Vegas, but I think it's more of it to start spreading the wealth and calling attention to the other schools that are coming back. So I thought it had meaning to it, in my opinion. All right, let's get to the second half kickoff with it. Guys, if you were head coach Lincoln Riley, what would be your three main goals and objectives for the offense for spring practice? Chris, what are your three goals and objectives for offense this spring?
Build some offensive line cohesiveness and some depth. I think this offensive line group is going to be really good, by the way, especially when Ethan White joins. I mean, there's a ton of talent and ton of experience, so I think they're going to be good. But you want some cohesiveness, and you need to go. I think they'll go 8 deep. You need to go 8 deep in case you have some injuries. So I'd focus some time there. I'd like to see if I can get something from my tight end group. USC hasn't got much from its tight end group in years. The offense is going to be good even without getting much from the tight end position. But it certainly would be nice if you can create some mismatches there. Number 3, improve Caleb Williams' understanding of the game. It's funny that, I mean, why would that be my main goal? Because Caleb Williams is physically the best, most talented guy who's ever played quarterback at USC, and as talented as anybody who's played probably any other college too. He still only has a season and a half as a starter. This guy can get better. There are things he can learn. He can make better decisions. And so I think Lincoln Riley's probably going to focus on taking Caleb Williams from being the best player in the country to being the best player in the country and a guy who really understands what he's doing every play he's out there. So that'll be exciting to watch, actually.
Eric, what are your priorities as if you were Lincoln Riley on the offense? Goals and objectives.
Yeah, those sounded good. I mean, Chris convinced me that his three are the right three. I mean, depth on the offensive line for sure, right? Bring that up. I think your starters are going to be guys that you know now. The cohesiveness, again, we talked about, do you have everybody there? How much time do you want to just stick one guy at one spot, or do you want to move them around? But getting, Jarrett Kingston comes in, Michael Tarquin comes in, getting those guys acclimated and into everything and the whole well-oiled machine, all that stuff. I think that's big for the offensive line. I think where can Caleb go next? Like keep lighting that fire, keep pushing him. He's different. He's different mentally, where I don't have a lot of concerns. The guy won the Heisman Trophy last year. I don't think he's coasting at this point. Like he pushes himself. Not a lot of concerns there. But again, how do you challenge him? How do you keep him moving and progressing? Like you're talking about to the point where you're the best quarterback in the country, college, NFL, any of that. How do you get there? And I'll say kind of sorting out maybe the running game a little bit. Is Marshawn Lloyd your guy? Where does Austin Jones fit in on that? Is Ray Leak Brown there? And Darwin Barlow, right? Is he a factor going forward? Can he make a push this spring? How does that shake out? Because you've got both your early enrollees there too. So this is probably your running back room for the year. So how does that develop, and how do you use all those guys?
Okay. Let's take a look at Mark. What do you think?
Yeah, look, I don't think there's anything left to talk about. So I'll go as far as the offensive line.
Mute yourself then.
Done. Now, look, I'll just be real specific. get the tackles, the offensive tackle spots solidified. You gotta figure out your left tackle and your right tackle. Interior is taken care of. You know Justin's gonna be your center. I think everybody agrees that Ethan White and Jonah are going to be your starting guards. So get the tackles, get that tackle situation figured out. The running game, Eric touched on it. Is it going to be Austin Jones? Is it going to be Marshawn Lloyd? I don't think it's going to be Rayleigh Brown at running back. I think he's going to be a much more versatile athlete this year. And then use a tight end. I really like Lake McCree. I don't think you have to wait any longer to see what you have. He's added some good weight. He's got the good size. So make him the guy. Let's make the offense complete. And give Caleb Williams that extra tool to use. Last year, I think everybody knows that the tight end was a big part of Lincoln's offense at Oklahoma. Well, that wasn't a big part of the offense last year. So let's utilize it.
All right. Succinctly, my goals and objectives if I was Lincoln Riley would be the offensive line, the use of the tight end, incorporating it, and one that hasn't been mentioned, they need to become more physical up front, to the point where they could compete against a defensive front like coming from the SEC, or probably more importantly, in the case of USC, foreshadowing the Big Ten. Okay, guys, if you were the defensive coordinator, Alex Grinch, what would be your top 3 goals and objectives for your defense in spring practice, and why? So, Chris, you come from the defensive side of the ball, having been a defensive back in college. What are the 3 goals and objectives?
Number 1, I want physicality and disruption up front. In modern college football, teams are going to score on you. And what you have to be able to do, you have to be able to get to the quarterback. You have to create negative plays. You have to put pressure on the offense that leads to turnovers. You have to be able to do those things. USC could not do those things consistently last year. And Thule was the only guy who week to week you could count on. They have to be able to do that this year. Number 2, depth at linebacker. The loss of Gentry at the end of the season last year was devastating. You can't be in that position. Linebackers get hurt. That's a really physically demanding position. Shane Lee's going to give you everything he has. He's not going to be as athletic as the other guys, but he's a tough guy. He's a smart guy. He knows how to play. Mason Cobb, I think, will be very good. Gentry, if he's healthy, and he should be by then, will be very good. That means you have to get Rajon Davis and or Tackett Curtis where they can step in and play at a very high level. You have to be able to accomplish that. Otherwise, you get an injury or two, and you're in the situation they were last year, where you have guys that just can't play the position now on the field. In the secondary, can I find 5 guys I trust? Because the last couple of years, most of the time, it was 1 or 2 guys you could trust, and even those guys weren't very trustworthy sometimes. Can I find 5 guys I can trust? 5 guys who are going to do their assignment, who I can expect to play solid man coverage, who can wrap up and bring a guy down in the open field? Can I find that? There's a ton of talent in that secondary, a ton. And last year they were a mess. And the year before that, they were a mess. Can I find 5 guys I can trust to play solid fundamental football?
All right. Well, Eric, you are Alex Grinch. Happy Halloween. Give me 3 goals and objectives in order.
Yeah, so for him, I think it's his spot. Those 3 safeties, the nickel and the 2 deep ones. Chris mentioned 5 guys in the secondary. I could narrow it down to 3. The big plays, the angles, the tackling in the secondary. I think that all has to get shored up. And again, is that something that you can do during spring? Is that a full summer and through fall camp? Whatever it is, get going on that and make sure that those guys understand everything that needs to be done, the communication, all of that, and the angles they need to take. You can't have, I mean, you think about the Tulane game, and all I think about are just Tulane offensive players running like they're just going warming up and down the field. And so that just is something that you can't see again from the USC secondary. I would really love to see that rush end position figured out to the point where going into fall, we are locked up here, and this is going to be a ton of production from this position specifically. And then I think it's mentality, right? Chris talked about can you be disruptive and make plays and all of that. I think it's, do you have a defense that ends spring feeling really good about itself and confident that it can do this in year two? That's a lot to sort of put behind you the way it ended, and what they've certainly been hearing about. I mean, the players, I know they do everything they can not to listen to social media and this stuff and all of that kind of thing. They know what happened. They know what is being said. Can you sort of switch that and leave spring feeling really good about what you've done and having that mentality as a defense? That's it for me, especially up front. Do you know going in, we're going to be the most physical group on every field that we step on when it comes time for the game to start in the fall?
Mark?
Yeah, if I'm Alex Grinch, I'm making sure my position room coaches are getting the job done. Number one, Sean Nua, I'm not sure if it's fair, but all the pressure is going to be on him. He's losing probably the defense's most productive player. And you've now got to replace them with players that you're bringing in via the transfer and guys who are, making switches into position. So you're going to have to get that defensive line to be dominant, to be physical. Obviously, I mentioned it earlier. Chris talked about it. Eric, you talked about it. They just got to tackle. I don't think, we don't have to, become brain surgeons to get this figured out. They need to become a more physical team on defense. They need to be able to, at the point of impact, bring somebody down. I understand there's going to be missed tackles, but it can't be at the point where, as Eric just pointed out, that they're getting run over, and they're not just running by you; they're running through you. That's got to change, and I don't know if you can get that type of change in 15 practices, but it's going to have to happen.
All right, well, I'm going to go in order. I think they need to develop the defensive line. I think that's already been mentioned. They need to control the game. Second, I think they need to find an edge rusher, because that appears to be a very critical part to Alex Grinch's defense. And third, they need to solidify the secondary. And if you take all those three, no matter how you slice it, goes back to Kulkin's, they got to tackle. And I think that's kind of the underlying of all the three that I mentioned. So, all right, so now we're going to hit a spot here to end our regular second half of conversation. So for those of you watching or listening, make sure you load up with plenty of pies, apples, anything you want to throw at us after this. But here's the question. After the spring game and the conclusion of spring ball, name me three likely candidates on offense or defense who could enter their name into the transfer portal, and why. I think it's appropriate we start off with Chris Arledge. Who could be?
Why is that appropriate?
Well, because you're Chris.
I don't even like this question. I think it's an awful question. I'm going to answer it, but I don't like it.
No, I said you didn't have to like it, but that's the question.
Okay. Corey Foreman, for reasons we don't have to go into. Darwin Barlow, I think he's going to be fourth on the depth chart. And if you're fourth on the depth chart and you've been around for a number of years, then it's natural for you to look around and see if there's some other place where you can get the ball. And Sierra Wright. If Damani Jackson, if Covington, if Roland Wallace, if those three guys all pass him up, and I think they're going to, then he's gone from being a starter to having a whole boatload of guys in front of him, and that's a tough spot to be in. So I'm not hoping that those guys leave, but I think those are guys that may want to take a look at the portal and see what's available.
You handled that beautifully.
Thank you.
Eric, you're welcome. Eric?
Yeah, the answer is anybody who clearly gets passed by a first-year player or second-year player, and that's across the board in college football on every roster. So potentially a lot of guys, if the early enrollees and that 2022 class do really well. But again, you don't know how it shakes out. We've not physically seen anybody even walk out to a spring ball practice right now. The idea that they're the same guy that they were last fall, 4 months ago, whatever it was, is I think kind of unfair to them a little bit, like Chris alluded to. But there's going to be movement. There's going to be movement off every roster after every spring game when that portal opens again on May 1st. So the idea that like this is going to be the fall roster when the rest of the 2023 class gets here, I think we all know that's not true. And yeah, anyone who sees their playing time potentially seriously threatened by a very young player, there's reasons to look into the portal.
Okay, Mark, you're the Grim Reaper. Who's going?
Yeah, I'm with Chris. I don't like this question.
That's a good sign. That's a good sign. Okay, go ahead.
Well, look, I'm going to take the chicken bleep approach to this one, only because they entered the portal and there's a possibility they're probably going to use it at the end of spring practice. Colin Mobley, Kobe Pepe are two. And then, I mentioned his name earlier, and that's only because, Father Time isn't slowing down. He's a true junior. He plays linebacker, and USC brought in linebackers, and they brought in Tackett Curtis. So I'd hate to see it happen, but Rajon Davis. I can pull a whole bunch of other names out of there to Eric's point. If you've been around and you're getting passed up by new guys, something to consider.
Okay, well, I'm going to answer the question that's very unpopular with the panel. I'm going to go with Corey Foreman for the obvious reasons. I'm going to come a real shot in the dark on this one. I'm going to say Rayleigh Brown, because I don't know whether Rayleigh Brown is willing to become a situational player when he probably wants to carry the ball 20, 25 times. I would find it easy, from my opinion, that he ends up transferring to a school like Fresno State, where he would be well coached under Jeff Tedford. I'm not advocating that he do it. I can just
That's what it sounds like. You're even talking about what great coaching you'll get.
Oh,
Not only do I hate your question, I hate your answer.
Well, you know what? That's a compliment coming from you.
It's not. I can assure you it's not.
Well, defend your case, counselor. I hope he doesn't leave, but I still wonder why they don't run him on fly sweeps and get him a few more carries. I didn't understand it last season. I hope that they will consider it this season if he's in the slot. Now, there's a tie for number 3. To me, Darwin Barlow is the no-brainer, okay? Because, when he's been in the game, he's been good, but since we don't get to see him practice, maybe there's something in there that they find lacking. The other one is, I agree with Mark. I think Rajon Davis, I think he very much doesn't want to transfer, but if he gets passed up as a linebacker, to me, all bets are off. But it's an uncomfortable question, maybe an unfair question, but it is part of what can happen after spring ball. So with that, we are into overtime. Panel, it's halftime, overtime. Time to answer some viewer questions. Okay, number 1 from Scott in Gilbert, Arizona. He has a 2-part question. 1, if SC was to get a commitment from Dylan Raiola, while he's ranked as the number 1 overall prospect in the 2024 class, is he kind of a lightning rod that would help USC close with other top players around the country, but especially from Southern California schools? This is a open topic area of our podcast. Step in, guys. What do you think? Is he a game changer if he commits?
I think that's yes and then no. Yes, he is absolutely a lightning rod. He is, I'd say probably him and Jeremiah Smith, the wide receiver from Florida, are the two most well-known public guys in this 2024 class. I actually don't know what it would do specifically to Southern California recruits. I think Raiola is a national name. When you have Georgia coming after you, Nebraska coming after you, and he's the kind of guy that shows up on campuses like that react the way that those schools do. I mean, a former Ohio State commit, he doesn't know just the Southern California guys. He knows everybody everywhere. There's guys back east, Midwest, South, Texas, all that know Dylan Raiola. I don't think there's a bigger boost for local guys with him. I think getting him, that's a national big time get. And yes, he is a guy that will go out and get guys to play with him.
He also, if you've watched his highlight tape, he's an interesting player. He really has nice touch, which you don't I guess quarterbacks now, they have so much coaching, so much 7-on-7 for so many years that they come into college more advanced than they did in the old days. But that kid really has nice touch on his throws. He's a really special prospect.
Well, the reason they're coming in so advanced, and part of the question was, is he going to be able to affect Southern California recruits? He's out here training in Southern California often with the quarterback group. With what is it, 3D quarterbacks like that. So yeah, he's going to be in contact with a lot of Southern California wide receivers, running backs, offensive linemen. So yeah, I mean, it could have an effect. I don't think it's whoever Lincoln Riley wants is who Dylan Raiola is going to go after should he commit to USC verbally. So that's what it comes down to.
Yeah, and a point to be added on this last week, I think it was this last week, that Raiola was, according to On3, believes that SC is in the lead for Raiola over Nebraska. And of course, we know that Nebraska's offensive line coach is Raiola's uncle, in other words, the brother of Dylan's father, Dominic. So if SC can stay in the lead on this one, very interesting. Second part of the question, and this goes to Marc Kulkin. When is Marc going to stop saying the word sophomore using 3 syllables? While grammatically it might be correct, vocally it sounds awful. Just busting your chops, Marc. We all love you and the incredible job you do with your writing and podcast. So there you go.
So you can blame my 10th grade English teacher, Forrest Zimmerman, who.
What year were you in 10th grade? What would you call a person in 10th grade?
A sophomore. And he made sure we pronounced it grammatically correct. And there was only one other rule that I remember from that class, and that was when you transition, never use the word but, always use however, because nothing good ever comes from the but. So
he was wrong.
Oh, that's very profound.
He was wrong about that, by the way. That's bad writing to always use however. It's 3 syllables where one will do. It's not good. So Zimmerman, was that Forrest? What was his name?
Forrest Zimmerman, and he talked with his hands quite a bit. That got me sent to the vice principal's office one time.
Well, Forrest, you've already gotten Marc in trouble with one viewer, and in your writing advice, I find to be very unpersuasive.
Between Zimmerman, however, and sophomore, we've got 3 syllable words everywhere in this.
Yeah.
I'll do my best to sound less sophomoric.
Wow, we all learned something from that question. Thank you very much, Scott in Gilbert, Arizona. Question 2 from Simi, I guess it's Simi, in Culver City, California. Do you think that the Trojans transition from the Pac-12 to the Big Ten will be easier or harder than you originally thought?
Exactly the same. I had it nailed originally.
Which was?
No, look, the transition is not going to be. The Big Ten has 3 powerhouse teams. They'll now have 4. The playoff is making it so that you can lose 2 games and get in the playoff pretty consistently if you play the type of schedule USC will be playing. So if you thought that you needed to run through the Big Ten undefeated or with one loss to make the playoff, now we know that's not going to be true. So it's easier in that sense. But the conference itself is the same. You have 3 heavyweights, and you have a couple of teams that aren't heavyweights, but are capable of fielding good football teams like Wisconsin and Iowa, and have good home field advantages. And then you have a bunch of the dregs like you have anywhere else that you should beat up on consistently. Sorry, Northwestern.
Well, we've also seen with the SEC too, the more teams you put in a conference, the more diluted the schedule gets. And so you're not, the likelihood of USC getting away at Ohio State, away at Michigan, away at Penn State in a season, that's not going to happen. So the more teams that go in, the easier the schedules tend to be. I think if we're just talking football, yeah, I think we all kind of saw the ins and outs of that. I do think for the other sports, it's going to be tougher. The travel is going to be hard. Going and playing those teams in some of these other sports, it's a step. I mean, USC doesn't have a softball team, right? So for just about everything else, it's going to be a step up for those other sports. For football, the travel's going to be what it is. They're not going to go to Rutgers one week and then to Maryland the week after that. And so I think it'll be, I mean, the way the Pac-12 is right now, if the Pac-12 was going to be the way it's going to be this fall every single year, then maybe it's easier to go play in the Big Ten right now. I don't think it is. And I think once those media rights deals start kicking in and the money starts getting passed around and you have a few years behind you of this separation, I think whatever the Pac something is starts to fall away. But yeah, right now, I think the schedules probably look pretty similar going forward in 2024 and beyond.
I think it depends on the recruiting. I think it'll be harder than originally thought if SC can't get the type of linemen that they'll need to compete for championships every year. So it falls back on the recruiting. That's why I'm so normally I'm focused on recruiting, but even more so to see what they're bringing in and how it'll line up. But maybe the transfer portal will kind of ease some of that. All right. Question from Cindy in Thousand Oaks, California. Do you think the Coliseum will undergo more renovation in the future? And what do you think can be added for fan enjoyment? Any thoughts?
I don't know about a full-on restoration renovation, but there are probably going to be some enhancements. The big conference, I mentioned this on my show, that they came through Galen Center and they kind of had a notepad and they made some suggestions on improvements they'd like to see. They probably are doing the same thing with the Coliseum. The big conference, their fans travel, and they're going to want to make sure that they're comfortable if they're going to spend, hundreds to thousands of dollars traveling from the East Coast, Midwest to come out to the LA Coliseum. So yeah, I think so.
That's an interesting take. Do I think there'll be major renovations? The only one I wish they would have done was to enclose the Coliseum, so it's a true bowl shape with where the portable bleachers are behind the peristyle end. I wish they'd get rid of that, and at the very worst, put in bleachers that kind of surround it, more enclosed feeling, so that you can still see the peristyle end above the last row there. For fan enjoyment, I've always said this, especially, and I think Mark made a good point. There's going to be a lot of fans coming from other places. They're going to bring their kids, their teenagers, potential future players. I've always thought that the Coliseum, the Trojans should put, life-size or bigger than life statues around the Coliseum of great football players and other athletes that maybe track and field. I know that they have a statue or two by, Heritage Hall, but really, when you look at some of the other universities that I've been to, they make a big deal out of almost Greek-like statues of their famous athletes. I think that would be a nice touch.
Can I weigh in on this?
I wish you would. Sure.
I don't think they're going to do major renovations, but I hate the major renovation they did. I mean, I hate it.
Agree.
You can, and I don't know if they could have, because it's an historic building. I don't know what changes you can make, but the reality is, if they would have kept the peristyle gutted the inside and then come up with a tiered stadium closer to the field so that the seats are better, the sight lines are better, the stadium is louder, then you would have an actual real modern stadium instead of spending a fortune so that the wealthy donors have really fun place to hang out and you still have a super old stadium everywhere else. It's a disaster. I hate it. And I don't think there's anything that can be done about it, but I thought I'd get that off my chest.
I'd like them to get rid of that black wrought iron fence that they surrounded the Coliseum with. Give back some of the tailgating experience back to the fans.
Yeah.
It just feels so benign now around the stadium.
Amen to that, brother.
So they need to figure that out, especially with the Lucas Museum essentially on the property now. That's a big behemoth. It's bigger than the Coliseum.
Yes, it is. It's like looking at Close Encounters of the Third Kind when the spaceship lands. All right, 2 quick questions to end it here from Ernie in Baldwin Hills, California. What past USC receivers will remind me of Zachariah Branch?
RJ Soward.
Ooh.
RJ Soward. Zachariah Branch will be a harder working, higher character RJ Soward, but people forget just how gifted RJ was. I mean, extraordinary. In the open field, there was nobody like him. He was fast, he was quick, he had vision. He's a guy. This is a guy who got picked in the first round of the NFL draft, despite the fact that there were all kinds of rumors about what a disaster he was in his head and how he couldn't behave and all the rest of this, right? Despite the fact that he still gets picked in the first round because he was an extraordinary talent. I see Branch as an RJ who works hard and is a better character guy.
You know, how about Marquise Lee? Does he fit the description? Exciting player once the ball's in his hands, explosive.
No.
Get you 345 yards in the game and still lose.
Yeah, I don't know if Zach is quite hey, you can just stand out on the sideline and beat a guy all the way deep. I think he can run like that, but I think he's more dangerous working out of the slot and over the middle. I mean, you're talking about like Marquise Lee, one of the best wide receivers ever at USC, could do a lot of stuff. The comp, and this is going to go away from USC, but the comp is Jalen Waddle, Alabama receiver who went number 6 overall in the draft. That's kind of the one that scouts will use for Zachariah Branch. Zachariah Branch actually posted better track times than Waddle did. And so, it's what's crazy is all of these big names you're talking about, but a little bit better in these areas. So the ceiling for him is there. I think athletically and just what they can do on a field. Yeah, Marquise Lee is probably certainly among kind of semi-recent ones, is one that would come up. But I think he's different. I think he's different than USC fans have seen. I don't think there's a guy where you'll go, oh yeah, that reminds me of that guy. USC ran. There were a lot of that sort of big number 1 outside receiver, and they played to kind of different results at USC, but you saw a lot of the similar characteristics in those guys. I think Branch is different than what we've seen.
I will say that Branch kind of well, first of all, I think Branch is better than RJ Soward. I think he's more agile than Soward. I'm not taking away from the electricity that Soward brought, but also kind of reminds me a little bit in part of his game of the late Kevin Williams, better known as Bug, who was extremely quick as a wide receiver. But Branch, I think Branch is going to be something that we haven't seen before, and is going to be someone where you're going to say he's going to remind us of himself by the time of he's done playing. All right, final question, guys, from Cyrus in the Bay Area. How does the panel think Lenny Vandermeer, who of course former Trojan offensive lineman and was a member of the administration for a while, how do you think he'll do as a new head coach of St. Ignatius High School in the Bay Area? I think it'll be interesting because St. Ignatius used to give SC some players. One of them, I think, was Mike Ryan, a starting guard. on the 72 national championship. I know that goes back long time ago, but they're also in a very tough league. I think they're in the league with Bellarmine, and it's kind of their version of the Trinity League in Southern California. And they won some CIF titles in the early 2000s. And but their record the last 10 years has been a losing record. But again, they're in a tough league. Any comments on Lenny? I know I wish him the best.
I know nothing about that high school, and I know nothing about Lenny as a coach. I remember him as a player, though. He did a nice job, so I do wish him the best.
Well, one good thing he's got going for him is he played at Mater Dei under Bruce Rawlinson, and he definitely knows what it takes to be good. A system, he's been there, done that, but this is his first time to be a head coach at parochial school, so it'll be worth watching. All right, again, if you have any questions or comments for our panel, go to either of the WeAreSC message boards and click on the thread that pertains to Inside the Trojans Huddle, viewer or listener questions. So that'll do it for Tuesday's edition of Inside the Trojans Huddle. So until next Tuesday, a big thank you again to our panelists, Marc Kulkin, Erik McKinney, and Chris Arledge. Special thank you to all of you for watching or listening to Inside the Trojans Huddle. Have yourself a great week. This is your moderator, Greg Katz, saying, fight on, everybody.